welcome back to another episode of the Unfounded Podcast, everyone. Sorry for the delay on the episode this week. I usually release one on Sunday or sometime around then, but I was, I guess you could say busy. Not busy in the work sense, obviously, but busy kind of mentally, I guess, and emotionally. So there's been a lot going on in my sphere recently, and it's been doing a number on me. So it's I do want to talk about it and kind of go over, how the end of the month went for me. And there's been a lot to talk about. Like, there's a lot going on to talk about, honestly. I mean, we got the election, we've got Sober October, the end of October, Halloween, all of that. It's been a really kind of crazy time, and I'm wondering or curious if it has been for you guys as well. Anyway, before we get into that, though, I do want to preface this episode. If you are enjoying the episodes, you like the content, please go to my Facebook page. That is the facebook.com/the Unfounded Podcast. Like, share, and subscribe there if you can. I also put out some content, quotes that I find motivating, things like that. I like to share videos, stuff like that from time to time on there. A lot of times I'll refer, content that I've brought up on the podcast. A lot of times I'm pulling it from that Facebook page. So check that out. I've got an Instagram page. That's where I pull a lot of the quotes that I use from, is the page that I put on there if you want to go find them somewhere else. That is instagram.com/the Unfounded Pod. And then if you want to just visit my website, and that's a good place to send people if they don't know or don't have a podcast like app they use. You can just go to the website at the-unfounded-podcast.simplecast.com. I know that's a mouthful. I'm working on getting that changed and shortened for you guys, but check me out there. And then last but certainly not least, guys, if you do like the content and you feel comfortable doing it, please try to or please support me in whatever means possible, right? If you would like to support me monetarily, I have a Patreon page. The Unfounded Podcast is the name of the page, but it is patreon.com/the Unfounded Pod. My goal there is just not to make a bunch of money, but just simply to pay for the expense of the podcast every month. So if you do feel comfortable supporting in that way, please do. If not, please continue to enjoy the content as you have been. The biggest payoff for me is just seeing people apply this in their life, as I've said before. So thank you for listening up until this point, and without further ado, let's get on into it. So I do have a quote that I want to talk about today. It's by Charles Bukowski. And it was one I was just kind of going through this morning. I was looking through some quotes on my Instagram page there, and this one kind of jumped out at me a little bit. And I'm not sure why, but I guess we'll find out here, won't we? It says, "We are here to laugh at the odds and live our lives so well that death will tremble to take us." That's Charles Bukowski, as I said. We are here to laugh at the odds and live our lives so well that death will tremble to take us. I think there's something beautiful in that message. I like the laughter part. Hints at the comedy of life, right? Which is the comment that I led with this post, was life is a comedy. You have control of few things, and they are very centered on you. You can control your choice, and through that choice, you can control your perspective in some way, I believe. You always have a choice. It's a simple kind of binary choice. One of the things we've kind of identified in computer science. And it's actually a question that my friend the other night that I told you about, that how we have very deep conversations with often. It's a conversation that we were having about, can you create consciousness? Can science create consciousness? And I when he asked that question, I was first like, no, kind of cocky in a way too, like, no way, man. You know what I mean? But it was funny because he was like, well, I mean, you got to think about it, like ones and zeros, right? And when he said that, because I've made the argument before, it kind of connected to this argument I've talked with him about before. As I've gone through this spiritual journey, in the sense I've, kind of engaged with different religions and been a little more attracted to certain ones at certain times. So, like, for instance, like Buddhism was one that I was really attracted to at a certain time, and Alan Watts was somebody that's really influential in my life. And anyway, I had this idea of duality that I was working with at one point, and we talked about it. And we had talked about how computers, the zeros and ones, the binary code, which is a form of language, right, is kind of the simplest form of language you can imagine, which is, I wonder if it gets at something fundamental, because it's something, like I said, talked about, especially in the Eastern religions, of this duality. But you see it represented in the Western religions as well, with good and evil, right? But it's like there's this, like if you look at a yin and yang symbol, you can pull up one of those yin yang symbols, and you'll see, I believe it's a snake, right? Like chasing itself or something like that, if I'm not mistaken, or two koi fish. No, maybe it's two koi fish, but one's black with a white eye, and one's white with a black eye, right? And they're kind of chasing each other, and this circle of life kind of comes out of it, but it's this duality as well, like this left and right, up and down, right or wrong, good or bad, good or evil kind of a thing. You know what I mean? Like this kind of duality jumps out of it. And I think that there's something deeply spiritual in that, and that science maybe has stumbled upon something like a fundamental I don't know, because I haven't really thought the idea out very far, and I'm kind of surprised I'm talking about it right now, because I wasn't thinking about it at all before we started this. But it's like, why isn't the argument that I came back against with, because I found, because once we started talking about that, what I was just describing, this duality aspect, I was like, well, maybe artificial intelligence is possible in a way, then, like actual conscious intelligence. But then I was sitting here thinking, like, well, no, it's kind of the fish in the water problem, isn't it? It's like we're trying to do something that from within that thing. So it's like how do you create a consciousness? Sorry, I'm having a hard time talking right now. How do you create a consciousness that has independent thought, independent structure, and kind of independent purpose in a spiritual sense? I would argue. How do you make that when you're having another conscious perspective constructed? It has to be constructed, right? So in order for the AI to function, the AI has to be built by another consciousness, right? Which means that even if it's in unintended ways, that consciousness and that experience is going to imprint on the creation itself in some way. And so that this is what I was arguing, this is what I argued for kind of after the fact, was that that's why maybe I'm still kind of sticking with the original reaction I had, was that it's not possible that way, because even if you did that, you'd have something kind of like a unintended clone in certain ways of that consciousness, in the ways or the assumptions of certain fundamental realities that it built upon. You know what I mean? That maybe are not correct, or maybe are, subjectively correct, like the world is constructed, but there is no objective way to view it because we're within the universe or the world. Do you get what I'm saying? It's one of the beautiful things I find in this. We're here to laugh at the odds and live our lives so well that death will tremble to take us. One of the things I found beautiful in Buddhism is this idea that everything can exist and is supposed to exist in balance. That there's not a need for elimination in some way. Like one of the messages I found fascinating that came with, Alan Watts is, and he's a fascinating character. You really should check him out if you haven't. There are lectures, hours and hours of recorded lectures of his that you can listen to, and he's just an absolutely fascinating character and speaker, in a sense, to listen to. You'll get lost in the way he talks. Anyway, check him out if you haven't. It's very cool. I have a couple videos on my Facebook page, but there's this idea that like everything exists in a balance and there's no need to eliminate anything. So like one of the problems I think we have right now, especially politically, is that there's a lot of people that feel like we need to eliminate either like a certain person or a certain group or a certain identity. That there's this other mentality that's grown within the United States where we have really split, at least in an identity sort of way, that our conceptions of our identities is really split at a fundamental level, and it's kind of just been demonstrated at a national level again, and it has been for honestly arguably for 20 years or more, right? But that there is this, like, even though people kind of don't want to admit it, there's a lot of people you'll hear argue for like, oh, it's the internet's just exposed some kind of crazy people, and those people have a megaphone and they're the ones that are the loudest, so those are the ones you see. But I don't know if I agree with that. I think we're giving people too much credit in that sense. That what you have is kind of certain people that, yes, it's kind of like an amplification of what was before the internet. It's like, hey, like before you had certain people that would say whatever they were thinking, and those people were generally labeled as like assholes, kind of, right? But they were willing to take the identity kind of hit, the kind of ego hit that would entail, and they knew it, or the societal hit, right, whatever it was, to say what they were thinking. That kind of process was reined in, like what you said and how far you took it and how much you attacked was reined in by that, because you really were associated at a fundamental level with what you were saying in a responsibility sort of way, right? So this tying of people to what they say and to who they are reflected societally, then it kind of reins in what they're willing to do. And you have to be psychotic in some way to want to, or like, in an odd way, like spiritually suicidal to want to like push that or say anything that would be so fundamentally stability shaking in a way societally that it would, or do anything like that it would, destroy you as an individual, if that makes sense, right? So it reins people in a certain way, I guess is what I'm arguing for. And so this has been amplified in a bad way with the internet, and that's kind of one thing that I think we have identified, is that it's given, that it is true that people do have this kind of they are amplified. Certain voices are, and they're usually they are the most radical ones. That's simply, I think, a product of like that personality trait, that like the people that are the loudest are also going to have megaphones on the internet. You know what I mean? They didn't just get left behind. But the difference is the thing that reined them in that before isn't there anymore, because the aspect that tied you to what you were saying kind of, it is in certain ways, like Twitter and Facebook and stuff. Like if you're saying stuff on there and you have your identity, people are going to know and attach it to what you say, and we've seen ramifications of that play out over the last couple of years, especially politically. But like but the point is that you can, if you want to, through these other mediums, Reddit or Twitter, kind of have these I don't know how to describe them. It's something kind of evil. It's like a I don't know. It's kind of like a fighting to fight kind of thing that's going on there, where people, there's so many people that have created accounts and created other false identities, and even, just with their own, even if it's with their own identity, kind of felt, because they're detached from even I think some of this is being detached from the physical consequences of, like, when you're near somebody and you say something that's hurtful, you feel it. I think this is part of the way you can sense like that empathic ability in everybody. Like it's there in everybody, as long as you don't have, I think, some kind of fundamental problem going on, biochemically or whatever in the brain, right? Like that is blocking you from having that kind of physical reaction. Like there's obviously physical manifestations of problems that can affect the way that you feel emotionally. That's inarguable. But I think in general, most people have this wiring, is what I'm saying. And this wiring is something like an ability for you to sense, to communicate in some fundamental way that either is a remnant of a past way we communicated, or a predecessor of what's about to come. I can't figure out which it is yet, but it's something like that. And that you empathize with people. I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there. It's why I'm sorry. I think I found it again. It's that was a long little break. It's what reins you in, right? You feel what you say, like the ramifications of it directly when you're physically in front of somebody and you say something, or if that's, but you also feel it physically if you do it physically. You know what I mean? There's different manifestations of pain. It doesn't always have to be in the physical sense. You feel that emotional sense of pain is an empathic result that I think is directly correlated to some sort of inbuilt sense that we haven't properly identified. Like I said, that is either prehistoric or something that's a predecessor, like an evolving trait that is still developing. We need some kind of reining in, and I think that's what people are arguing for, but it also doesn't mean that those are the only people that feel that way. That feel all of those things, the crazy shit that's coming out of their mouth. They're just the people that are like ballsy enough to say it, I think, is one of the things. Like, there's a lot of people that find comfort in kind of sheltering themselves from the idea that they have bad thoughts, if that makes sense. It's something that I did for a long time, and I didn't realize there's this concept of unwanted thoughts, intrusive thoughts, I think it is. And let's go to, this is healthline.com, intrusive thoughts. Intrusive, them and how to stop them. What are intrusive thoughts? Intrusive thoughts are thoughts that seem to be stuck in your mind. They can cause distress, since the nature of the thought might be upsetting. They may also recur frequently, which can make the concern worse. Intrusive thoughts may be violent or disturbing. They may be thoughts of sexual nature, including fantasies. They can also be about behaviors you find unacceptable or abhorrent. There are things that make you uncomfortable when you think about them, right? But recur. They're those kind of thoughts that, like, when you try to run away from them, they just pop up more frequently, right? Like a dragon in some way, a little monster, right? Those kind of thoughts are ones that, like, certain people are very willing to, like, enunciate into the wild. Other people have, but don't ever. A lot of people have, but don't ever enunciate. But they find very willing to judge other people for the people that do enunciate them. So what I'm saying is something like, I'm not defending people that say things intentionally to hurt people. I'm not defending the abuse of free speech, if that makes sense. Defining what the abuse of free speech, or who should do that, that's a different conversation, and it's something that's very hard to argue for. But there is a way, I think, that you can abuse free speech, and maybe this is the point that we're coming to in this country, is that there is certain ways, like I said, that the founding fathers have there's a necessity, and they knew that this needed to be an experiment, but it wasn't properly communicated downwards, because the success of this thing, the overarching success of this, and the ability for it to create kind of prosperity, as much as people want to tear down the United States, it's ridiculous the amount of prosperity it's brought to the world in a very, very short period of time, that got lost. That message of an experiment got lost in this, and we're now at this point, what? How many years? Hundreds of years later, right? That people don't realize that this is a very, very, like, new thing, and that the idea that it's even comparable to something like Rome is kind of laughable at this point. You know what I mean? Like, yes, we have the most prosperity. We have, like, I think the most technologically advanced society or civilization, but in terms of politics and government, we don't necessarily have the most stable. Now, yes, we are based in some ways off of the way that off of Rome and kind of this republic formation, right? We are, but there's aspects of this, that the democratic aspect of this and the way we've structured our government with the 3 branches and kind of this balance of powers that's very unique, and representative government mixed in with that, right? So it's like this mixing of democratic process with the republic structure is something that's very unique and something that is kind of not well tested. Now, what I think we're coming to realize, like I said, is that there's certain aspects that aren't working very well that we may need to adjust. Some of it, one of the odd ones, may be around free speech. Now, what I mean by that, I'm not saying that we need to rein in free speech in any way, but what I am saying is we need to define that there is something, we need to figure out a way to define what abuse of free speech is. And whether it is as a live free speech. Is it? So yeah, no, in the United States, constitutional law, this is from Wikipedia, false statements of fact are an exemption from protection of free speech. Good. So at least we have that aspect of it, right? That you can't lie. But there's some way in which you can coerce or twist the truth, right? You can withhold information, ways that you can, wouldn't be considered lies, that I think you can manipulate free speech. I don't know. I'm having a hard time with this. Like, I'm getting to this idea and I'm kind of hitting a wall, because trying, like, it really is, it's like such a fundamental part of the way we structured everything, and free speech is so foundational that that's why, like, it's the First Amendment, right? There's a reason they structured it the way they did. It's very scary to try to rein in anything like that, but I think we need something like, we do need the external kind of control, the guardrails. Like, I think guardrails are something like morals or ethics, but we can't have it it can't be instituted, right? It can't be instituted from the state. That doesn't work at all. It devolves into genocidal mess. We need to get away from this idea that we need to eliminate another group of people, another side, another faction, especially within the United States. It's something that doesn't have those. Imagine the yin and yang symbol, like I said again, as 2 koi fish. Imagine them chasing each other and going round and round, but none of them ever getting closer to the other one, just kind of like chasing a tail, essentially, right? You can spin that thing faster, but it's not going to cause, more stability or more serenity. It's going to cause a lot of pain and suffering, through the exertion. And I think that's kind of it's a very simple way to, and kind of not a good way to describe something like civil unrest or war or something like that. But it is something like, I think, us forgetting who we are in unity, dividing ourselves into smaller groups, and then allowing our more tribal and primal nature to take hold through the distancing from the truth. The truth, something like the spoken individuality of each person, the spoken subjective truth of each person. It's like you can't make. It's like maybe when I argue for you there is no objective truth. It's like maybe you can get to something like an objective truth, but the only way you do it is through the lens of every single person. It's like you have to combine everybody's perspectives, and that's what's beautiful about the democratic, process, is that it really is a process of leveraging everybody when it's unadulterated, right? It's a process of allowing everybody's perspective to combine into one grand perspective. And that through that, we get the most fundamental truth that we can possibly see objectively. But that and also in a weird way, it's not objectively true still, even if at that level. It's just the closest thing to it we have. right? And so we've designed a system that, as long as it is unadulterated, like I said, should function to get us to that point. Thus leading us not to the most satisfying answer, but to the most objectively true one, quotation marks. Here's my phone. It's like we're furthering ourselves from that. We're distancing ourselves from the ability to share those perspectives. We're segmenting ourselves, which is one of the things that's so dangerous about groupthink. Kind of this, what do they call it politically? The right always calls this, or accuses the left of this identity politics, right? That's what's dangerous about that. It's something that's very tied to like Marxism and this class think, this way of grouping people, primarily, right? That what it leads to is nothing but this division, and when people are divided in this way, we have very primal instincts that take over, and what they produce is something like evil in the world, something like that, right? And so that the way that we've figured out how to get around that is something like a democratic process, which a democratic process is the most fundamentally liberal, classical liberal political process we have come up with to this point. But it's not necessarily perfect. There's a lot of byproducts, native byproducts of the democratic process that we don't talk about. Fundamental things. Things like they're inefficient in a way. Like if you want efficiency, you want a dictatorship. If you think of it structurally, it's very simple, the structure is, right? So you have one person in power and they're making all of the decisions, right? So when you need to have a decision made, hey, what do we do? Boom. What do we do? Boom. What do we do? Boom. See? Very efficient. It just happens. Usually in those positions too, they have the ability and the authority in some way through that governmental power to kind of have total authority, even, with the ability to execute people for disobeying, treasonous things, quotation marks, right? So there's this ability to have a lot of efficiency. With that efficiency comes a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, instability over a long period of time, or maybe not necessarily over a long period of time, but kind of a production of this pain, of a certain type of hell, right, that the human being can experience, tyranny, right? But so that's the negative aspect of it, but it produces this, like I said, this efficiency, this simplicity, which is why it came before. It's a more simple form of government, right? But then you kind of have, this idea that also, it didn't really come before, I guess, just developed in separate. It was kind of, I think, the original form of government, right? But anyway, I digress. You have this idea of the republic, having this community-based, initially, I believe, qualification-based, not democratic, not elected, but like these people were, the largest landowners, essentially, right? The most influential people in the society were the people that voted. I believe they always had to be men, if I'm not mistaken. There were certain qualifications that they had to have as well, but there was no election process, if I'm not mistaken. In ancient Greece, things like that, where this developed. But as it moved forward, a disconnection from the populace, that isolation of the political process from kind of this whole other perspective, this whole other truth, in some ways causes problems that are irreparable, that cause the government to separate and violence to occur in many ways as well. There's a downside to it that when you have this like community-based idea where you You separate, you have a kind of a uniform community based on shared values. That's all fine and dandy, but it's restricted by definition, and that creates the necessity, or it creates in a world that is not finite with only you and your community, a whole bunch of others, through which a whole lot of violence and complication comes. So there's this flaw in the fundamental Republican concept that is needed remedying. One of the ways the United States, I think, attempted to remedy that, obviously, is with this democratic process, this idea of elected officials functioning in a democratic republic, right? Like a republic structure. And having different bodies all elected for different terms, having this series of checks and balances, was a brilliant way to try to fix the inherent flaws, within the republic itself, to try to leverage that other perspective, the perspective of the populace first. And that structurally there's a beauty to it that is like hard to deny. It's like, holy crap, these gentlemen were living in a time when most people, they wouldn't open a book their entire life. You know what I mean? Things that, and that's, I'm not speaking ill of anybody in that when I say that. I'm trying to say that to set, like, how astonishing it is that this kind of revelation came out of a time when tyranny was the common form of government, right? And slavery was was commonplace in the land, and this idea of the sanctity of the individual and the democratic process that develops out of that, classical liberal idea, and then mixing that with using that to try to remedy the flaws of a republic is something. It's a brilliant idea that was also very experimental, that has worked in certain ways, but has internal flaws that need fixing. And one of them being, like I said, is something like, and I really don't like that I argued for that. I felt a little like, reining in of free speech is a very weird thing to talk about. I'm not talking about, because there isn't anything you can do in that way. It's like, we need to have like a public recognition of it. It's like, when you have a recognition, like a moral recognition, an ethical recognition that, hey, what you say online is no different than what you say in person, and that the way you represent yourself online needs to be mirrored with the way you represent yourself in person, not just for your society, but for yourself, because it will cause a disjointed nature in you. It will create kind of an alter identity through which your shadow can come out and play, and you don't want that to happen. I promise you that. Nobody wants that to happen. Nobody wants anybody to be acting in their negative vibration, in that kind of low vibe, in that very kind of egocentric place. Keep yourself whole. Don't change the way you act around certain people, right? We need this public recognition of that. I think the only way we have that is through some kind of spiritual awakening, which is, I think, happening right now as well. But there is this necessity for us to recognize that there's a responsibility that comes with free speech. It's something like the responsibility to not be nihilistic. Everything works fine under free speech until you have people being intellectually dishonest to themselves, or actually rooting for the world to crumble. You can't have those kind of bad actors within that kind of a system, because then they can leverage free speech in a way to actually tear it down. You see, so there's a fundamental problem there, but you can't, it's free speech for a reason. So it's like, you can't create legislation to restrict it. I'm not arguing for that. I wanted to be clear about that. We need a moral and ethical reining in. But that there's also this other problem with that, the way that we view the positions of elected government. The way I think of people that run for office view the position of elected government, and then also the way that we, the American people, have perverted the position into something else as well. It's kind of it's both sides' fault in a way. The American people and the representatives, right? The representatives really are representatives, whether they want to be or not. But the corruption we see inside of our government is only because we've allowed it to happen. We've allowed ourselves to be intellectually dishonest for years now, not just one generation, but multiple generations, generation over generation after generation. We've allowed the segmenting and dividing, as we've uncovered and learned of the vastness and the diversity of this country and had that grow and developed, instead of exposing ourselves to it in many ways, like a lot of people have done, a lot of people haven't done that. A lot of people, kind of restricted themselves into communities. I'm not talking necessarily as much modern day, but I think especially, 60s, 70s, 80s, there's a lot of this going on. That there's this necessity for us as individuals to hold our elected officials accountable, but also that the elected officials need to recognize what they are, and I've argued this before, in that role, that once you embody that role, even starting to run for that role, that your identity itself is what you're trading away. It's a very, very heavy burden you're accepting when doing that. There are people I feel that were good. Tulsi Gabbard is who I was trying to think of in the couple episodes ago when I was trying to think of the presidential candidate that I was, in favor of, or wish the Democratic Party would have had run. Tulsi Gabbard is a fantastic candidate, objectively, by anybody I've ever seen talk about her. There's people that criticize her, but I think they're more political hitmen in a sense. Everybody's got them, right? An objectively honorable and respectable person that I would, be proud to have lead the country. And I think anybody would have a hard argument to say otherwise, right? But that there's certain ways that there are very specific people, and they're rare now, that understand the responsibility of representative government, that most people that have gotten into those positions kind of use it as like we use most positions in hierarchies. People view them as like kind of perches to sit from. You know what I mean? Perches in which we kind of sit down and look at all the people we've conquered. That I think a lot of people treat the position of power, that way, especially politically. And then it's become almost the political game itself is to kind of leverage your perch to go to a higher perch. And that process of leveraging, your position and the power of your position to further yourself or gain more power or position. I don't like to talk about power in these terms necessarily, but it is a factor, I think, in some way that does motivate people, especially if they believe that power is the only way to motivate people, right? Then they're going to act in this way. And this has in some ways denigrated and perverted the system to a point where you truly do have to be willing to play along in that way, or else you kind of get eliminated from it. Enter Tulsi Gabbard, right? That's why she was essentially cut off from the democratic process in the primary, right? But it's a shame, right? But that the people that are there that are wanting to represent us are arguably the people that are the worst to be representing us. Because they are the ones, especially, and that's one of the things that I, argued about with Biden, is that being in a system like that for that long, even though it sounds like a trivial thing to bring up, is not. That if you worked in something for that long, 45 years, you've seen this process corrupt, but you've kind of been, in some ways, you can't say you were the one trying to stop it. Because it has happened over about that period of time. Maybe even a little longer, I'm sure longer. So it's like, hey, there's no squeaky clean here for anybody. But something about the process, the longer you're in it, the more it makes you have to play it harder, kind of, right? That I think holds true, and it scares me a little bit about Biden. But that this is why the process is broken. That we have to, in some ways, find a way. We do need to communicate to each other in a way, our intentions. We need to stop focusing on this national level because it makes us look for this objective truth. We need to start focusing in our own spheres of influence. We need to pull back from this national chaos because it's going to continue to devolve the way it is. You know what I mean? The madness is getting crazier. So what I'm going to do is pull back from it. Try to focus on my own sphere, which is always the best bet. Try to focus on myself and try to focus on what I can do and hold on to during this kind of chaotic time. How I can develop. What blessings I have, actually. That's the best way to practice this way you can flip your perspective is when you're feeling down, seriously try to ask yourself, well, yeah, but what is there that you're grateful for? It's going to feel initially like that's the dumbest fucking question you could ask, period. Because in some ways it kind of is. But it's also not. That's what's funny about it. As soon as you start actually being truthful and answering that, you'll realize, oh my God, everything. There's so many things that I'm thankful for, and I'm usually focusing on one thing that's making me feel like the whole world is shit. Isn't that funny? That's kind of what happens, I think, every 4 years with these elections. Maybe a part of that perversion process I've been talking about. I don't know. Something very complicated going on there with the American psyche and us. The way we've projected onto these people a lot of power that they weren't initially supposed to have. But kind of the ability to play this political game. That political game should have never been allowed to grow. Those bodies, when acting as they're supposed to function, as representatives, those bodies should be apolitical. But they're not. That's how they're designed to function, right? As voices, as arms of the people that elected them. Here's the thing that's hard to tell, is I don't know if we really are that divided. Are we really that divided? Because the election results seem to say that we are really that closely divided. That maybe that is why the political system is this chaotic. Is that maybe we are that much divided. We think we're that much divided. Not like fundamentally we are. No, we're never that divided, right? We're never truly divided. It's just that we have a lot of people, all of us think that we're divided in this fundamental way. And so it's playing out politically too. It is actually working the system in a weird way. In the way I just described it, right? And being an arm of the people, the representative of the people, if it is 50-50 split, then shit, I guess it is working pretty fucking good. Oh, man. Right? So what are we upset about? Well, there are some questionable things going on around this election. I think it's kind of obvious for anybody that's been around more than one, right? That this is very odd, the way that this is playing out, and kind of the excuses being used for why it's playing out and taking so long and things like that. Well, okay. We'll see what happens. But honestly, at this point, I'm so glad that the election is over, and I'm so glad all this stuff is done with that. I really don't care who's the president next. And I kind of hope you feel the same in a weird way, and I would have never have said that 4 years ago. But what I just said earlier, I truly mean. I think what is needed now is for all of us to go internal, to go small circle, not big circle, to flip that perspective, like I said. Take lemons, make lemonade. You know what I'm saying? That's always what you're supposed to do. Always. That's never not true. That's one of the most true statements ever. Make lemons out of lemonade, or make lemonade out of lemons. Something like that, right? You know what I'm talking about. When life gives you lemons, make some lemonade. That's it. So true. Lemons are the hurdles. Lemonade's the reward, right? A lot of work that it entails to get to the reward, but hey, you're the only thing that can do it. The only thing that can make lemonade is human beings. And you are one of them, my listeners. That's a weird way to say it. I don't like that. Sorry about that. I hope you're doing very good out there, guys. I hope the election process hasn't been too stressful for you. It kind of has for me. Like I said, I was going to kind of talk about it earlier in the podcast, but I kind of forgot. But this has been rough, right? I'm, being unemployed, trying to figure out, the stress of that during this time when there's a lot of people unemployed, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do with that. Also, how to develop and grow this, put work and effort into this, also with all this election and chaos going on around that. It was just a lot to deal with, right? And I'm sure you guys are all in your own ways feeling that kind of pressure as well. But that's why I'm saying I think the only way to deal with that, because a lot of it is coming from just the external world, is to reduce that circle, that sphere, that perspective, bring it in, narrow it down to whatever magnification you start to see, things that you can act on, parts of you that need fixing, things that you can actually do, instead of stuff that's out of your control and will always be out of your control. And there will always, in some ways, fundamentally be untrue. That there's objective truths that spin around you in the external world aren't that. They parade around as that for certain times, certain frames in time, certain snapshots in history. Then they change and they go away forever. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you. That was a weird way. I'm having a hard time talking today, guys. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate your support. Again, if you want to support me in any way, if you want to just check out my social media pages, check me out on Facebook, Instagram, or my webpage, or Patreon. Alrighty? And hope you're good out there, guys. Stay sane. Reduce that sphere, that perspective. Focus on yourself. All this shit will blow over at some point. But it will, right? So lots of love, guys. And I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.